The Intersystem Habitability Commission had a reputation for being thorough, precise, and overwhelmingly pessimistic. This was not a character flaw but a survival feature, honed over 3,000 years of cataloguing worlds across 12 spiral arms. Their job was simple: determine which planets could support life, and more importantly, which ones would aggressively reject it, like a body rejecting a poorly matched organ transplant. They had 17 categories of habitability, each with subcategories, footnotes, and appendices that could fill a small library. At the very bottom of this exhaustive list sat Category 17, biologically antagonistic environments requiring immediate evacuation protocols. In layman's terms, planets that wanted you dead and had the means to accomplish it. Planet Theta 7 had earned itself a place in Category 17 within 48 hours of initial survey completion. The report read like a horror novel written by a committee of paranoid xenobiologists. Atmospheric composition: 63% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, 14% sulfur dioxide, 2% assorted volatiles that made the sensors weep. Surface temperature range: -40 to +60 Celsius, often within the same local day cycle. Precipitation: hydrochloric acid with a pH of 1.2, falling with enough regularity to strip paint off starship hulls. Native flora: carnivorous, mobile, and apparently holding grudges. Native fauna: worse, gravitational inconsistencies, present, unexplained, and deeply concerning to physicists. Electromagnetic interference: constant, maddening, and guaranteed to turn any electronic device into an expensive paperweight within a standard week. The Catharian scientist who had led the survey team, a methodical individual named Vel Kim, who had catalogued over 400 worlds in his career, had added a personal note to the end of the report: "I have witnessed many hostile environments. I have walked on frozen methane wastes and volcanic hellscapes. I have never encountered a planet that felt actively malicious until Theta 7. Recommend permanent quarantine beacon and deletion of coordinates from public databases." The Commission had agreed unanimously, which was remarkable given that they rarely agreed on anything, including what constituted appropriate lunch breaks. Theta 7 was marked, flagged, sealed, and relegated to the dustbin of galactic exploration. Case closed, threat neutralized. Everyone could sleep soundly knowing that one more murder planet had been safely identified and avoided. Then Marcus Webb received the report and said, sounds like Colorado." Marcus was what the human diplomatic corps politely termed an independent explorer, and what everyone else termed that guy who keeps going places he shouldn't and somehow doesn't die. He had a ship called the Wandering Idiot, which he claimed was ironic, but everyone suspected was just accurate. He had a track record of visiting planets marked as moderately hazardous and sending back messages like "actually pretty nice, once you get used to the smell," or "the locals are friendly if you don't make direct eye contact." The fact that he was still alive was a source of ongoing bafflement to xenobiologists across the galaxy who had multiple theories but no solid conclusions. When Marcus filed a flight plan to Theta 7, the Intersystem Habitability Commission did something unprecedented. They contacted him directly. Not through official channels, not through a formal warning system, but through a live communication where 3 senior scientists took turns explaining in increasingly urgent tones exactly why visiting Theta 7 was a spectacularly bad idea. Marcus had listened patiently, nodding occasionally, and when they finished, he had asked a single question: "But has anyone actually tried living there?" The silence that followed was the sound of three highly educated individuals experiencing simultaneous aneurysms. Living there, Velkim had sputtered. The survey team spent 4 hours on the surface, and 2 of them required medical intervention for psychological trauma. Yeah, but 4 hours isn't really giving it a fair shake. Marcus had replied reasonably. I'm thinking more like a month. See how it goes. He had disconnected before they could organize an intervention, which was probably for the best, because the intervention would have required sedatives and possibly a small military force. The scientific community did the only thing they could. They monitored his approach with the grim fascination of people watching a slow-motion disaster. Multiple research stations along his route tried to dissuade him. A Vraxian philosophy professor attempted to engage him in a dialogue about the value of survival versus curiosity. A Quillan medical ship offered to give him a free psychological evaluation. Marcus had thanked them all politely and continued on course, humming something that the translation software couldn't quite pass, but sounded suspiciously cheerful. When the wandering idiot entered Theta 7's atmosphere, 17 different scientific institutions were watching via long-range observation drones. They watched the acid rain hammer against his shields. They watched the electromagnetic storms play havoc with his navigation systems. They watched him descend through cloud cover that looked like it was actively trying to digest his ship. They watched him land in a clearing surrounded by writhing vegetation that immediately began creeping toward his landing site. And then they watched Marcus Webb emerge from his ship wearing a standard environmental suit, look around at the hellscape surrounding him, and say into his comm unit, "Oh yeah, this'll work just fine." Velkim, watching from his research station 3 systems away, made a noise that his assistant later described as somewhere between a choke and a whimper. The human had landed in one of the most hostile regions of an already hostile planet, in an area where the survey team's drones had lasted an average of 12 minutes before catastrophic failure. Marcus was now walking the perimeter of his landing site, occasionally kicking at the ground like he was testing soil quality. The carnivorous plants that had consumed a survey drone were swaying toward him with clear intent. Marcus looked at them, looked at his ship, looked back at the plants, and pulled out what appeared to be a machete. "All right, ground rules," they heard him say. "You stay over there, I stay over here. Nobody gets chopped. Deal?" The plants, lacking the cognitive capacity for deal-making, continued advancing. Marcus sighed, and with 3 efficient swings, cleared a 2-meter perimeter. The remaining plants seemed to reconsider their approach, which should have been impossible because plants did not reconsider anything, but Theta 7 was already breaking rules. "There we go," Marcus said cheerfully. Boundaries established. He spent the next hour unloading equipment from his ship, while acid rain pattered against his suit's shield, and the ambient temperature dropped 18 degrees. The scientists watching began updating their observational logs with increasing amounts of disbelief. "Subject appears unconcerned by environmental hazards," one wrote. "Subject is singing," another noted with barely concealed horror. By the end of the first day, Marcus had erected a preliminary shelter using prefabricated panels and what appeared to be an alarming amount of duct tape. The shelter should not have held against the wind speeds recorded in the area, but it did, possibly through sheer stubbornness. By the end of the 3rd day, Marcus had expanded the shelter, established a water filtration system that was somehow processing the acid rain into something drinkable, and had started a small garden using seeds he had brought and soil he had treated through methods he declined to explain in detail. "Trade secret," he had said when asked. Also probably not technically legal in 12 systems, so let's just say I'm good with chemistry. The first week saw the arrival of local fauna. The creatures that approached Marcus's camp were in the survey report under the designation Apex Predators, Extreme Caution Advised, Lethal Force Authorized. They were 2 meters tall at the shoulder, had too many teeth, and moved with the fluid grace of something that had never encountered prey that survived the first encounter. 3 of them circled Marcus's camp on day 8. Marcus had been repairing a solar panel, because of course he had managed to get solar panels working despite the atmospheric interference. He noticed the predators, set down his tools, and walked toward them. Every scientist watching experienced a moment of collective panic. Marcus stopped 5 meters from the largest predator. They stared at each other. Then Marcus pulled out what appeared to be a ration bar, broke off a piece, and tossed it toward the creature. "Might not be good for you," Marcus said conversationally, "but figured we could find out together." The predator sniffed the offering, consumed it in one bite, and sat down. Just sat, like a very large, very dangerous dog who had decided this human was acceptable. The other 2 predators followed suit. Marcus tossed them more ration bars. Within 20 minutes, he was sitting cross-legged in front of 3 apex predators, explaining his plans for expanding the shelter. "Gonna need better insulation," he told them. "These temperature swings are murder on the joints." One of the predators yawned, showing teeth that could easily bisect a human torso. Marcus reached out and scratched it behind what might have been an ear. "Yeah, you get it," he said. Velkim put his head in his hands. His assistant, a young Quillan researcher named Pixith, was frantically taking notes. "This contradicts 17 established principles of xenobiology," Pixith said, all 4 of her eyes wide. "This contradicts basic logic," Velkim muttered. "He has befriended the apex predators. They tried to eat our drones. They ate our drones very successfully, and now they are receiving scratches." The situation deteriorated further, from a scientific perspective, when Marcus began cataloging the local ecosystem and finding uses for everything. The electromagnetic storms that had destroyed sensitive equipment. Marcus had rigged up a collection system that stored the energy in batteries he had modified for the purpose. The gravitational anomalies that made standard movement hazardous. Marcus had built his shelter in a stable zone and marked the anomaly locations with flags, calling them the fun spots, and occasionally using them for what appeared to be exercise routines that would have killed a trained athlete. The toxic soil bacteria. Marcus had isolated a strain that produced a compound useful for treating his equipment against acid rain corrosion. "He has turned a Class 17 planet into a resource opportunity," Velkim said in the tone of someone whose worldview was crumbling. "This should not be possible." By week 3, the scientific community reached a consensus. They needed to investigate in person. Observing Marcus Webb via drone footage was clearly insufficient to understand what exactly was happening on Theta 7. They assembled a team representing the peak of their respective fields. Velkim would lead, bringing his extensive survey experience. Pixith would handle biological analysis. They recruited Dr. Thorin Vex, a human environmental engineer who specialized in hostile environment adaptation, specifically because they needed someone who might understand the cognitive processes at work. They added Commander Zix of the Vraxian Navy, who had experience with emergency survival situations. And finally, they brought Dr. Methys Quinn, a Quillan xenopsychologist, because someone needed to determine if Marcus was insane, lucky, or operating on principles that defied current understanding. The team arrived in a heavily shielded research vessel, landed 300 meters from Marcus's camp per safety protocols, and emerged in full hazard gear that had been rated for environments up to Category 15. They were taking no chances. Marcus met them at the perimeter of his camp wearing his environmental suit with the helmet retracted, breathing the toxic atmosphere like it was a spring day. "Hey there," he called out, waving. "Welcome to the neighborhood. Watch out for the plants on your left. They get grabby around noon." Commander Zix performed a quick environmental scan, and his antenna drooped in confusion. "The atmospheric readings show sulfur dioxide levels that should be causing immediate respiratory distress," he said. "I've been here for 3 weeks," Marcus replied. "You build up a tolerance. Also, I'm running air filters in the shelter. Step inside and you can take your helmets off." Probably, that single word, probably did more to terrify the scientific team than any of the environmental hazards. They followed Marcus into his shelter, which had somehow grown into a multi-room structure that included what appeared to be a living area, a workspace, a storage room, and something Marcus called the experimental garden, which we don't discuss with regulatory agencies. The interior was surprisingly comfortable, with temperature control that functioned despite the external fluctuations, lighting that worked despite the electromagnetic interference, and furniture that Marcus had apparently fabricated from local materials. "Okay, Doctor," Quinn said slowly, sitting on a chair that definitely had not come from Marcus's ship. "I'm going to start with the obvious question. How are you alive?" Marcus blinked. "Is that a philosophical question or a medical one?" he asked. "Both," Dr. Quinn said. "Either. Pick your favorite." Marcus shrugged and began making something he claimed was coffee, but smelled like it was plotting something. "Honestly, I just adapted. The atmosphere is rough at first, but human lungs are pretty versatile. The acid rain is manageable if you have proper drainage. The temperature swings are annoying but not lethal if you dress in layers. The local life is dangerous, sure, but so are grizzly bears and we live near those. You just have to respect the environment and work with it instead of against it." He poured the coffee-adjacent substance into containers and offered them around. Nobody accepted. Dr. Vex, the human engineer, was examining the shelter's construction with professional interest. "This shouldn't be structurally sound," he said. "The materials you're using, the support structure, it violates at least 8 building codes I can think of." Marcus grinned. "Yeah, well, building codes are more like guidelines, and I'm pretty sure they don't apply 300 light-years from the nearest inspector. It works, it's held up through 4 major storms, and I've got expansion plans." He pulled out what appeared to be hand-drawn blueprints, thinking about adding a greenhouse, maybe a workshop. "There's a cave system about 2 kilometers east that might be good for long-term storage. Need to check if anything's living in it first." Velkim was staring at the blueprints like they were personally offensive. "You are planning permanent habitation," he said flatly, "on a Class 17 planet. You understand that classification means certain death for prolonged exposure." Marcus looked around his comfortable, definitely not death-inducing shelter. "I mean, I'm doing okay so far," he pointed out. "And honestly, once you get past the initial challenges, this place has a lot going for it. No crowds, no traffic, plenty of space, interesting neighbors." He gestured toward the window where one of the apex predators was visible, lounging in a sunny spot, like a massive carnivorous cat. "That's Bert, by the way. He and his siblings have been super helpful keeping smaller predators away from the camp." "You named the apex predator Bert," Commander Zix said. "Seemed rude not to," Marcus replied. "We're neighbors." The interview continued for 6 hours, during which the scientific team asked progressively more desperate questions and received answers that were simultaneously reasonable and completely unhinged. How did Marcus handle the gravitational anomalies? He had mapped them and used them for entertainment. The electromagnetic storms, free power, and a pretty light show. The toxic flora. Some of it was edible after proper preparation, and he had been experimenting with local cuisine. Experimentation being the key word, he admitted. I've got a running list of things that definitely shouldn't be eaten. Lost 2 days to what I'm calling the purple incident. Don't ask. Dr. Quinn was filling out psychological evaluation forms and running out of boxes to check. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your current stress levels? She asked. Marcus considered this. Maybe a 3? The rain was keeping me up the first week, but I've gotten used to it. Kind of soothing now, in an aggressive precipitation sort of way. Dr. Quinn made a note that would later read, subject displays either exceptional adaptation or catastrophic judgment impairment. Possibly both. Recommend further study and possibly sedation. On day 2 of the investigation, Marcus took the team on a walking tour of the local area. This required the scientists to venture outside their comfort zone, which had a radius of approximately 0 meters from their landing ship. Marcus led them through terrain that the survey report had marked as impassable and past hazards marked as lethal. He did this while maintaining a running commentary on local features, like he was a tour guide in a nature preserve rather than a death world. So over here we've got what I call the screaming trees, Marcus said, gesturing to a grove of vegetation that was indeed emitting a sound like eternal torment. They do that during pollination season. Sounds creepy, but you get used to it. Actually helps you track time since they do it at regular intervals. The trees, which had caused survey team members to report nightmares, were apparently Marcus's version of a clock. And that field there that's got some gravitational weirdness that'll make you float if you hit the right spot. Great core workout. The field that had caused 3 separate expedition drones to malfunction and drift into the upper atmosphere was Marcus's gym. They encountered local fauna, including several species that the survey had classified as extremely aggressive. Marcus greeted them by name or physical description, and most of them ignored the group, which defied every ecological model the scientists had. They're territorial, not stupid, Marcus explained when Velkim asked how he had achieved this. I stay out of their core territories. They don't bother my camp. We've got an understanding. The fact that he had negotiated informal treaties with wildlife that lacked the capacity for complex reasoning was something Dr. Quinn decided to table for later because she had reached her limit for impossible things before lunch. The tour concluded at a water source that Marcus had been using to supplement his filtration system. The water ran blue, bubbled ominously, and had a pH that made Pixith's scanner emit distressed beeping. Marcus filled a container and drank from it after running it through a portable filter. Bit metallic, he admitted, but hydration is hydration. On the final day of investigation, the scientific team gathered their findings, which amounted to Marcus Webb should be dead, but wasn't. Theta 7 remained hostile, but apparently negotiable for humans, and their entire understanding of habitability classifications needed revision. Vex summed it up best. He's not doing anything that violates physics, but he's definitely violating the spirit of several scientific principles. They prepared to leave, offering Marcus a ride back to civilized space. He declined. I've got a good thing going here, he said. Besides, I already filed the homesteading claim. This is home now. Velkim stared at him. You filed a homesteading claim on a Class 17 planet. Marcus nodded cheerfully. Paperwork went through last week. Turns out nobody else wanted it, so approval was pretty quick. I'm thinking about bringing in some more supplies, maybe seeing if any other humans want to start a small colony. Could be nice, having neighbors who appreciate a challenge. The scientific team returned to their respective institutions and filed reports that were met with disbelief, demands for peer review, and several accusations of falsified data. But the drone footage was real, the environmental readings were accurate, and Marcus Webb was still alive and thriving on Theta 7, sending back weekly updates on his continued survival and expansion plans. The Intersystem Habitability Commission held an emergency session to address the Marcus Webb situation. After 3 days of debate, they reached a decision. Theta 7 would remain classified as Class 17, with a new subcategory designation of habitable for humans, inadvisable for everyone else. A new line was added to the galactic database. Note: human risk assessment differs significantly from galactic standards. What humans consider acceptable living conditions may include environments classified as actively hostile. Approach human colonization patterns with caution and low expectations for sensible behavior. 6 months after Marcus's initial landing, the first human colony ship arrived at Theta 7. It carried 200 volunteers who had read Marcus's reports and decided that a planet where you could befriend apex predators and use electromagnetic storms for power was exactly the kind of place they wanted to live. The scientific community watched in horror as they landed, established a settlement adjacent to Marcus's camp, and began thriving in conditions that should have killed them within hours. By the end of the first year, the colony had grown to 500, had established trade routes for locally produced goods that somehow included food items made from toxic flora, and had submitted a petition to host the next Interstellar Agricultural Fair. Vel Kim received an invitation to visit the colony and declined, citing medical advice from his therapist. He did, however, receive regular updates from Marcus, who had appointed himself unofficial mayor and was organizing something called Storm Season Festival. The last message Vel Kim received included a photo of Marcus standing in front of a thriving settlement, surrounded by apex predators wearing what appeared to be decorative collars, with a banner behind him reading Theta 7. It's not that bad. Vel Kim filed the photo in a folder labeled Evidence that Humans Are a Galactic Anomaly and requested a vacation. The Intersystem Habitability Commission updated their classification manual with a new appendix titled Special Considerations for Human Settlement. It included a warning that what humans considered uninhabitable was really more of a suggestion, and that any planet marked as extremely dangerous should include a footnote that humans might find it cozy. The Commission also quietly adjusted their survey protocols to include a new question: is this planet dangerous enough to deter humans? Because if the answer was no, they needed to be prepared for colonization attempts regardless of official recommendations. Theta 7 was renamed New Frontier by popular vote of its residents, though the official designation remained unchanged in scientific databases. Marcus Webb became something of a legend, the human who looked at a planet that wanted everything dead and said, "I can work with this." When asked in interviews how he had survived those first critical weeks, he always gave the same answer: "I just treated it like camping in the Rockies. Worse weather, weirder wildlife, but the principle is the same. Respect the environment, adapt to conditions, and never forget your duct tape." And somewhere in the galactic core, in offices and laboratories across a dozen species, scientists updated their models and theories and tried to account for the human factor. They created new classifications, new warnings, new protocols, but deep down, they knew the truth. If a planet could theoretically support life, humans would find a way to live there, and probably open a coffee shop within the first year. It was not a comforting thought, but it was an accurate one. The universe had spent billions of years creating hostile environments that could kill with efficiency and creativity. Humans had spent thousands of years looking at those environments and saying challenge accepted. It was unclear who would win this cosmic contest of stubbornness, but smart money was on the species that had turned a death world into a tourist destination and named the local apex predators. Theta 7 remained on the Class 17 list, a monument to scientific classification and a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous thing about a planet is not what lives there naturally, but what shows up with a ship full of supplies and the unshakable conviction that anywhere can be home if you try hard enough and bring enough duct tape.